All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to UK CORRAL, the podcast that reviews every single comic book ever written by a writer from the British Isles or Ireland. I'm your co-host, Mike Allen. As always, I'm joined by Adamantium.
Oh, yes. Whoosh.
Yes. And, of course, Nice Man.
As I said, occasionally Nice Man.
Show us your shirt, Nice Man, because now we're on camera. Nice. Very cool. Very, very cool. One day we'll do an X-Men podcast.
Written by X-Men, written by Grant Morrison.
Yeah. Oh, you don't have to ask me twice. Trust me. That's on the agenda, just way down the line, but we'll get there.
I'll probably be dead by then.
No. We'll speed it up then. We'll rearrange it just for you.
We'll put you on ice. It's okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so today, much to the chagrin of Nice Man, we are going to review another Neil Gaiman comic. And this one is, I'm sorry, I'm just going to adjust my screen here. This one is Black Orchid by Neil Gaiman. And this is one of the only handful of DC comics he did before he started Sandman. And this is also one that I'd never read until this week. Adam, what's your experience with this comic?
I have a lot of familiarity with this. So, as I've already mentioned on the podcast, I was a huge Sandman fan. So that was one of the comics that really got me into quote-unquote mature titles for comics. Take that with a grain of salt, of course, Nice Man. But with that said, I then had a hunger to pursue anything else Neil Gaiman had written. And so I tracked a lot of his back catalog. Some I really liked, some I didn't care for quite as much. This one I really did enjoy, because I felt it was this perfect transition between him entering into the American market as a superhero story writer and transitioning into where he would go with a story like Sandman and with some of his other works he would do later on. And I find it very fascinating because I thought at the time Black Orchid was an original creation, a conception of Neil Gaiman. I didn't realize this was actually a pre-existing character in DC continuity.
Right. And I only knew that because I read every issue of Who's Who cover to cover.
Mm-hmm.
But this is another example during this period where DC was letting the British writers take their obscure old characters like Animal Man, Doom Patrol, who else? Kid Eternity. Swamp Thing. Well, Swamp Thing had a title, but these were revivals of characters no one had seen in a long time, right? So this was a character. I'm actually probably going to go back and read those adventure comic stories just because I want to see what her old stories were like. But this does do a slight revision on her origin. But before we get to that, Paul, did you know anything about Black Orchid before this? And had you read this series?
I bought the first issue when it came out. I had no hesitation in buying that issue for different reasons. I'll try and be succinct. I love the name Black Orchid. I love the title Black Orchid. I love the character Black Orchid. And Dave McKean is art. So, I mean, it was a no-brainer. Of course, I was going to buy it. And I thought, what's one reason I love the name Black Orchid? And I have to be honest and say it reminds me of Clue. Like with Professor Plum and Miss Scarlet and Reverend Green and so on. And here we have Black Orchid. But it's a great name for a character. It lends itself perfectly for reinterpretation, which is what they did. And I know I'm jumping around a bit here, but one of the things that I love about the British invasion of the 80s into mainly DC comics is that they have such a great talent for taking any character, no matter how obscure, and seeing the sparks in it that can be developed. And they did this so often, didn't they? I mean, even though Swamp Thing was kind of established, it was something of a revival, even though it wasn't that long before Martin Pascoe was doing it. And they, Alan Moore immediately sees Swamp Thing as an elemental creature, not a big walking pile of green snot. And and so then to give him credit, Neil Gaiman comes along and sees the potential in a Black Orchid in a Swamp Thing kind of way. It just lends itself to that so well. So I didn't hesitate to buy it when the first issue came out. But interestingly, for me, I didn't buy the second and third issues. If it had been a standalone graphic novel, I think that would have been fine, but it wanted me to come back for a second and a third, and one was enough for me, really. The slight difference here is like if we speak about Arkham Asylum, it's a one-off graphic novel. Grant Morrison, Dave McKean. If you speak about the JLA Earth 2, it's a one-off graphic novel. Grant Morrison, Frank Quitely. But this is a three-part series, and one was enough for me. So then the question becomes, at least for me, why was one enough for me? Since I love Black Orchid, I love the name, I love the design, I love the Dave McKean art, I love the character, I love the reinterpretation. So why didn't I come back for 2 and 3?
Well, hopefully we're going to find out today. But I also have to point out that from an outsider's point of view, as someone who did not buy this when it came out, my perspective or my whatever impression of this series, just from looking at it at the time, was it fit into this like this post Dark Knight phase of trying to make obviously these superheroes more for adults, and the art. Even though I didn't know who Dave McKean was at the time, it fit in with a lot of other artists who were painting in a realistic style. Like, do you guys remember Havoc and Wolverine?
Oh, yes.
Right? I think everyone bought it, but no one remembers it, right? Do you remember Havoc and Wolverine, Paul?
Was it a graphic novel?
It was a series of, it was 3 or 4, it was like prestige format.
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
And it was painted by, I don't remember who, but it was one of those where it was packaged as a comic for adults, but I mean, Walt Simonson and Louis Simonson wrote it. I love them, but they're superhero writers, right? So.
Yeah. I think also when we talk about this and we examine it, we're going to see that there is, as I said, it's very transitory in terms of its placement in the, I guess you could say, arc of where mature comics, quote unquote, mature comics are going in North American publication, at least at this point, because we're coming off the tail end of the introduction of Alan Moore writing Swamp Thing, which of course informs a lot of this stylistically and in terms of the universe and characters we're going to see. And it's right on the precipice of when Gaiman's going to do Sandman. So you're really seeing almost these proto points of themes that are going to become so frequently used within that series. One thing I do want to say is that after the popularity of Sandman, this was reissued as a trade paperback and in some iteration has been in print ever since, whether it's been hardback, your softcover trades. And just to do a little plug for the Windsor Public Library where I work, you can, if you have a membership, actually borrow it for free. Not only do we have a physical copy, we also have copies online that you can read using our app, so check that out. And if you don't live in Windsor, you probably have a public library system that has some apps that allow you to read free comics. It's probably going to be on there.
Nice. All right. Okay, so let's just jump into this. We are not going to summarize the story, but we are going to say that this kind of serves as not a reboot, but a revamp, because this is the way I like these types of things done, where they take the existing character and they reimagine them, but they maintain all the old continuity, right? And so Neil Gaiman basically figured out a way to revise Black Orchid's origin, and also found a way to tie her in to the Swamp Thing mythos, right? Mm-hmm. Created by Alan Moore. And without going into too much detail, one of the things Alan Moore did with Swamp Thing was establish that he was not a man turned into a monster. He was a plant elemental that had memories of Alec Holland. So it was a plant elemental that thought it was Alec Holland, but it was actually almost like a god whose consciousness actually went back millions of years, as far as I remember. Correct?
That's about the gist of it. And,
Yeah.
the continuity of Swamp Thing would differ after Alan Moore stepped away from the series. People would add on to the mythology, but that's the crux of it. And I think Alan Moore said, to paraphrase him at one point, he basically wanted to kill the previous Swamp Thing. In fact, the last issue I think Len Wein wrote actually had Swamp Thing shot up within a swamp and his cadaver being frozen and taken into some sort of facility where the Floronic Man was running tests on him. And then we get into the first issue of Alan Moore's official run, where we have the resurrection or the reconstitution of Swamp Thing. And I think Gaiman saw that. And I will give one critique. Granted, it's hard to say it becomes a cliche at this point, but he definitely took a lot of inspiration from Alan Moore's approach to Swamp Thing with this origin where it does end, and I think this isn't a spoiler, it happens within the first 5 pages of the book, with the death of Black Orchid.
Well,
here's
the thing is that I haven't read further, but I do know that by the time Black Orchid got to Suicide Squad, it was the little sister, Susie. Mm-hmm. She was now Black Orchid, right? And which, by the way, I love. Suicide Squad's a cool idea, but I really think that ruins a character to put out this type of treatment to Black Orchid and then just to stick her in Suicide Squad is a disservice to her character, I think. But I did read a brief history of her, and apparently by the time she got to New 52, it was a 4th version of the character, completely unrelated because it was all rebooted. I do like the idea that is touched on in this series, which is basically that, what was it, her ex-husband was trying to create plant-human hybrids, correct?
No, actually, no? It was an old college friend.
Oh,
yeah.
College friend. Okay.
They were just friends, Mike.
Yeah, they were just friends. And so the idea is that the original Black Orchid from the 60s was the first clone or whatever, hybrid. And now this is a second clone hybrid. And this one's name is something Black. What is it again?
I don't believe they're ever given really official names because as we explore this, I mean, neither one of these offshoots that we see is actually the original person.
Right.
Flora Black, I believe, might be the character you're thinking of.
Yes, Flora Black, yeah.
Anyway, maybe as we get into this, I don't think we should do a beat-by-beat synopsis, but maybe we should just give a very brief overview of what actually happens, let's say even in the first issue or first chapter of this.
Okay, sure. And as you say that, I'm going to flip through the pages here, which you guys cannot see, but if you'd like, I can share my screen.
Oh, you know what? You can do that, Mike, and I'm just going to give a very brief synopsis because I don't need to go into story beats. Essentially, as I said, though, it starts off in media res. Black Orchid is captured and she's killed in very brutal, very graphic fashion, to the point where I can imagine this being shocking for any existing fans of the character. But as the story goes on, we end up seeing these traces of her past with an ex-husband who has a violent history and relations to a well-known DC villain, Lex Luthor, who becomes a major part of the story as well, which threw me for a loop the first time I read this because I wasn't accustomed to big mainstays in the DC universe being part of these sort of Vertigo or Vertigo-adjacent stories. But regardless, as it goes on, we do find that Black Orchid, this superhero, was actually a creation of this man who was an old college friend of the original Flora Black. Flora, her exact past isn't revealed yet. It will happen in a future issue. But basically, we just come to see that this scientist has created a series of clones and hybrids of plants and humans, and using Flora's DNA, he has basically a garden of these sort of clones of hers. And one of these clones almost wakes up from like a psychic pain once Black Orchid is killed in that opening chapter. And as we go through the first issue, so much of it is just her having this existential awakening, this crisis where she's trying to figure out, well, who am I? What am I? As, of course, the scientist is trying to unveil some things, but not getting too specific because he knows it would just be overwhelming for her. And he divulges his history he had with big figures in the DC universe. Pamela Isley, better known as Poison Ivy, Jason Woodrue, better known, of course, as the Floronic Man, and, of course, Alec Holland, who isn't Swamp Thing, but would be responsible for the origin of Swamp Thing, as we mentioned.
Sure.
Anyway, throughout this issue, we also see this just destitution, this spiral of her ex-husband, who reveals after a drunken night talking to somebody about how he was rejected, how he just got out of jail, and he tried to even get a job with Lex Luthor, but Lex Luthor kicked him out of his office. He realizes this is horrible. This is all because that bitch. And he keeps referring to her as that. Who is this person? He's the ex-husband of Flora Black, and it's revealed he killed her at some point. And the issue ends in this very kind of cyclical fashion to what happened at the beginning, where the ex-husband is making his way towards the house where the scientist lives, as the scientist is bludgeoned in the middle of the night and attacked by the ex-husband. And yeah, that's how the story ends. We still don't know who Black Orchid is, what she is. We have an idea, but nothing really comes to full fruition. And we have these very vein-like, almost actually better analogy, vine-like connections of all these characters intertwined, but it's so clasped and twined together, we don't quite know who is who or what exactly is happening. That's going to occur more in the next issue. Yeah.
So I'm just going to say, like many of the comics that were coming out at this time, and like the ones I mentioned, like Havoc and Wolverine, and Paul earlier had mentioned Arkham Asylum, also drawn by Dave McKean. I think one of the key things that you can say about this type of comic is it's vague to the point of being vague on purpose, I think. And I think that also you could apply that to a lot of indie films where they're almost anti-plot. They have anti-plots. And I'm not saying this doesn't have a plot, because it does, but the art is not there to tell a clear, Jack Kirby type story of clear story beats and hitting you over the head with what's happening in each panel. I think there's a lot of figuring out that's going on, which is fine. But I think as the story goes on, it starts to become a little bit of a problem. But I think in this first issue, I think it's fine to kind of set up the mystery. Because I do think the art on a technical level is incredible. It's just a question of whether you think it's good for a comic book, which is a separate question, I think. But we'll get to that in a minute. But Paul, what's your first impression of this issue?
I really like the links, like to the other characters that you said, like Woodrow and Alec Holland and Poison Ivy. I mean, that's great comic book stuff, really, when you can tie everything to or link things like that. So I think very enjoyable for all of us who say, oh yeah, I know Poison Ivy, and it makes a point because it strengthens the whole concept that Black Orchid is part of the kind of what should we say, natural world, even though she's a bit of a construct. But I thought that was very good. I like that. What else was I going to say about it, really? Oh, just that Dave McKean had complained to Neil Gaiman at first when the plot or the story was first being developed, because he had wanted to draw Swamp Thing and he wanted to draw Batman. So that gave Neil Gaiman a spur to make sure that he constructed a story in which they would both legitimately appear. And I think they pulled that off.
Mm-hmm.
Well, okay, so since we're on that topic, I love them. I'm fine with them incorporating Floronic Man and Poison Ivy and Swamp Thing. I don't think Batman fit in this story because I felt like he stuck out like a sore thumb. Whether or not
50-50.
Yeah, like whether or not Dave McKean wanted to draw him or not, I don't really think he belonged. But that's fine.
When we talk about the synopsis a bit of the second chapter, I think we'll get into that. But, just for this one, I think it's as a nice man. As you said, this is your one issue you read of it when you collected it. You didn't really have an impulse to read another one. But after reading this, you're introduced to these characters, not necessarily A-listers in the DC universe, with the exception of Lex Luthor, who wasn't even as much a focus in this issue. It was more like the tertiary characters around the main players. I guess my question for you is, was there anything about this that after reading it, it made you feel, I don't need to continue with this?
I'm tempted not to answer so that I don't take up too much time. The problem I have is Neil Gaiman's writing.
Mm-hmm.
It makes me think of Harlan Ellison's criticism of Jerry Conway when he said he's a purple prose writer. I think Neil Gaiman's in love with his purple prose, even if it doesn't really lead anywhere or amount to much. I think that Neil Gaiman's writing is incredibly monotonous. And there was a commercial many years ago in Britain which was very good about a particular beer. And it said that beer refreshes parts that other beers don't reach, which was a great concept for a beer commercial. You know, it's not just a beer, it's going to fill you up. It's going to reach those parts that other beers don't reach. So when I read like Alan Moore, it's a beer that's reaching parts that are not usually reached. When I read Grant Morrison, it's a beer that reaches parts that are not usually reached. They're enlivening, refreshing, stimulating. Neil Gaiman is a poor writer. He's monotonous. It's purple prose monotony. His dialogue is very unconvincing, very forced. And you'll see later on in the second one and the third one, it's like, no. Thank goodness for him, and I'll say something ridiculous. Thank goodness I never got to edit a Neil Gaiman piece. And I'm sorry, one more tangent here while I'm on this little rant. We know that Alan Moore did the last 2 issues of Superman and Action Comics, right? Before Crisis.
Mm-hmm.
Wonderful. Wonderfully, again, refreshing, reaching the parts that others don't reach. Neil Gaiman tried this with Batman. He wrote a couple of issues, one of Batman, Whatever Happened to, and
the Cape Crusader. Yeah.
Whatever Happened to the Cape, yeah, and in Detective. Didn't even come close to comparing with with the intelligence of Alan Moore's work. I can't believe how staggeringly overrated Neil Gaiman is. I had the misfortune of seeing his movie, the movie adaptation Stardust. Just thought, please, can I have my money back? No.
I might diverge from your opinion sometimes for Neil Gaiman. I do not when it comes to Stardust. Yes, that was a horrible experience. With that said, I'm going to make one argument here, and I think this might be the most grounded that I've ever read Neil Gaiman be, which is saying a lot considering what happens in the course of this series. My argument is it's mainly characters speaking to one another and internal dialogue. Stylistically, if you don't like the prose, you're not going to like it. What I appreciate about this, though, and why I make the argument that I don't think Neil Gaiman is a good novelist, is that his prose style outside of dialogue isn't that strong. So that I am going to agree with you. I think he can write interesting dialogue that I will concede may not always feel natural, but has points to make, or at least feels like there's an objective to it. With this, I do feel there is something going on here where there is an objective to it. There is an opening section here during the massacre of the original Black Orchid where the villain goes, you know what? I've seen James Bond films. I've read comic books. I'm not going to reveal my evil plan. Kill her. And they shoot her. And there's just something so shocking, of course, about this character being killed off in the first 5 pages of its titular comic book, but also that sort of self-awareness that I've seen that pulled retrospectively in other comics. I've never quite seen that before this point, though. And I'm not saying it doesn't exist, but I can appreciate even a gesture like that, showing I think Neil Gaiman has some stuff to show here, such as that self-awareness a character has to go, I'm not going to be a James Bond villain, I'm going to do something. So, for me, it just gives me pause. I'm not going to try to sway you on your opinion of Neil Gaiman. I don't think it's possible. But, I just would like to argue from my perspective, I think there's some merit to this.
I'm going to say, I think at this point, in 1988, 89, Neil Gaiman, in my opinion, was probably, after Grant Morrison and Alan Moore, he was probably the third best writer working at the time. However, as well as maybe Frank Miller. But I think two things happened after this point. One, there's been a lot of other writers that have come along that are better. But also, I think his writing, I'm not going to say it's declined, but he's kind of like, all of his weaknesses got weaker and his strengths didn't get stronger. And so he didn't really develop. But I do think he has something that, Paul, you haven't mentioned. I do agree. I don't think he's boring. I think his problem is that he's able to develop or come up with plots or ideas as well as anyone, as well as Grant Morrison or Alan Moore. He just can't execute them as well, because I don't think, even though I think he is a good writer and he's obviously very well read, I don't think he quite understands how to just make a story really connect with a reader. Whereas someone like Alan Moore would have an idea and then he'd understand exactly how to keep the reader on the edge of their seat, following along with what's going to happen next, and also like the characters, and also this and also that. I think Neil Gaiman's focus, it's strange because I think he's good enough at certain things that he obviously did become very popular and had a huge career, but his weaknesses, like that I noticed over the years, got worse and worse, where to the point that, remember he did that follow-up Sandman miniseries?
Endless Nights, or
I think so. Or the last, no, it may be, but it was just like, it felt like it wasn't a story. It was just a series of, it was like a journey with nothing happening along the way. No obstacles, nothing to overcome, nothing interesting. And that's what I feel like.
Yeah, I agree with you, Mike. I think it's not that he became more oblique in his writing. I think he just became stagnant. I know people will argue this. I think Sandman is a great series, and I will still read that from time to time. But anything I've read of Neil Gaiman's past Sandman is the same story. Maybe things have shifted, but the themes, the characters, the interactions are the exact same. And jumping ahead a little bit, a retrospective criticism I might have of this series is that it's a proto version of what will happen to a degree in Sandman. So again, if I just want to lay my cards on the table, I'm going to say my biggest criticism with Neil Gaiman is that he really just has a few stories he tells. And there's times where it's done better. And then there's times where he's told he's the greatest writer in the world. He rests upon his laurels. And then we just get monotony at that point.
Right. Well, I think it's a case of, like, if you were to take like an analogy of a musician, you have someone who knows how to play guitar really well, but it doesn't mean they can write great songs. And maybe they at one point could write great songs, but they forgot how to be entertaining or forgot how to entertain an audience, right? They're kind of just playing the same thing over and over again. And they're getting to that self-indulgent point that a lot of musicians get to, where they just think, hey, I was big before and I was good before and everything I do is good. You said, it's just like you said, Adam, people told him he's the greatest writer in the world and he believed them. I think that's the problem.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Of course I agree, because I said it. Yeah.
Yeah. But basically, we're not going to dwell on every beat. But the only other thing I'm going to say about this issue, I personally don't necessarily like the fact that that Lex Luthor is the main villain behind all this. I would rather it be someone else. Like, create a new character, right?
This is not Lex Luthor. Here's my quiz for you. Who is it? This is not Lex Luthor. Who is this?
I was going to guess Lex Luthor, but I'm wrong, right?
No one else comes to mind?
Are you trying to say he's actually writing a different character?
Yes, really.
Okay, I'll say Kingpin.
Yes, it's the Kingpin. It's not
Yes.
Lex Luthor. It's the Kingpin.
You know what's funny is I think Neil Gaiman once criticized Marv Wolfman and John Byrne's Lex Luthor by saying all he is a skinny Kingpin. So maybe
Mm,
But the classic Lex Luthor is like just a fountain of knowledge and intelligence and bright stuff. This guy is just an absolute crushing bore.
hmm
he's certainly not the classic Lex Luthor, that's for sure. He shows he shows no signs of intelligence, right?
Right.
At all. I agree
He's
with that.
just a thug.
Yeah.
Mhm. I think the main takeaway of this is if they would have just given this character another name, would it have changed anything about the story?
Not
No.
at all. No.
Yeah.
So why even make it Lex Luthor? You're in the DC continuity. You have a dozen like low-level like crime lords that you could have referenced, or just created a brand new character. The
Yeah.
references for lower level characters such as like Poison Ivy and the Floronic Man, I think are good integrations, like what Grant Morrison does. Here, it's unnecessary. I agree with that.
Yep. All right. Well, why don't we jump to the next issue? Again, we're not going to summarize the plot. We're just going to say that in this issue, well, I mean, unless you'd like to give a quick 30-second rundown of what happens.
Very briefly, the ex-husband, Flora Black, goes into the house with the scientist who created these clones and beats him to death and discovers this garden of all these human plant hybrids and is so aghast and just horrified by what he sees that he goes on a killing spree, murdering all of them, except for one, an underdeveloped clone that basically looks like a prepubescent girl who becomes conscious during his attack, and she flies away. He definitely ventures into madness during all this, but during the course of this, he goes to Lex Luthor. He says, "Hey, Lex, there's this amazing stuff here. You have to see it." And I will say this is the one Lex Luthor moment where it did give me pause to say maybe there is some merit to having this character, where he goes, "So you destroyed everything of value. You've destroyed all these records, and you called me out here in the middle of the night to see a bunch of smashed up plants," which, I did chuckle at a little bit. But regardless, then this prepubescent style plant clone finds the other adult, the one that we had been following, who was awoken after Black Orchid's murder in the beginning of the first issue. And they just basically follow each other around with this idea of trying to discover who they are. They don't really know their identity yet. And so what they do is, using some of the information that was conveyed earlier to the adult plant clone, she tries to seek out some of the comrades of her now deceased former friend, including Pamela Isley, Alec Hodlin, and Jason Woodrue. Woodrue is off the map. As far as everyone is aware, Alec Hodlin is dead. So that only leaves Poison Ivy. So she goes to Gotham City, and this is where she has the encounter with Batman. There's a very interesting proto-Arkham Asylum setting here, where she actually goes into Arkham, encounters all of these different characters, has an encounter with Poison Ivy, and Batman again. Basically, the issue wraps up with this idea that even though she can't get any information from Ivy or anyone else, Batman slips that Alec Holland, he's dead, but not exactly. And you need to go to the Bayou and maybe talk to him, or talk to this thing that maybe will give you a better idea of who you are or what you are. And that's essentially what happens in the course of the comic. It should also be noted that Lex Luthor's men, they're trying to pursue these two escaped plant clones because Lex Luthor wants them for research, obviously. That's essentially the gist of what happens in this chapter.
Okay, so I have a question. I have read Arkham Asylum, but it's been a while, and I've read 1,000 Batman comics. For the life of me, I cannot figure out a lame-ass security at Arkham Asylum. Like, I know it's an asylum and it's not a jail, but how can you just walk in and be like, "Oh, I want to talk to the Joker," and he's just like sitting in a room? Shouldn't this be higher security than in a prison? You go in, you have to sit in a room, there's a guard there, right? You're by yourself. And it just seems in this story, she's able to just talk to whoever she wants because she brought in a bat sticker.
Yes. A bat sticker.
She's got a hall pass from Batman.
Right. Again, it's kind of one of those things where sometimes with superhero comics, when they try to make them too realistic, it actually draws attention to how ridiculous it is, right? That's what I felt like at that scene.
I'm going to make one argument. I think tonally it works. Logistically, I agree.
Sure.
You can try to reason it by saying, oh, it's so decrepit in just this big vacuous space because, staff are too intimidated to do anything to intervene or interact with these criminals. But really, it's just about setting this desolate, tone of despair in this building.
Right.
And that's the thing that I think McKean did so well in that comic with Morrison.
Right.
Which it makes Arkham Asylum a character. And a very ominous, oppressive character. That's my only argument there. Also, the renditions McKean does, because we haven't really touched so much on the art. It's going to happen later on when we see Arkham Asylum, but here, the illustrations he gives for characters like Two-Face and Joker and even Pamela Isley are just incredible.
I have to agree with that. He is a great artist, and this is actually better, in my opinion, than what I remember from Arkham Asylum, because I think that was more painted, right? And this is seems to be a little bit of a mixture. I'm not sure. I'm not an expert, but
it's more gridded. Yeah.
Yeah. It's certainly the art is incredible here. Oh, look at that. Arkham Asylum, perfect. You don't have to. Okay, so it's more painted. Yeah, it's more painted. But yeah, I know I tried to share my screen. You guys can't share my screen, but right now I've got the images of Poison Ivy up, and they look incredible. Like the use of color, just everything. I just think it's great. So on that level, I do like it, but I felt like, again, the sequence where she talks to Batman, it just felt a little bit shoehorned in, because even though this was right at the beginning of Batmania, I have always been averse to that idea that Batman is so cool that we just have to mention his name and you'll shudder and get excited. I'm so tired of that. I love Batman, but not that Batman. So I don't know. That's my take on this one. Pretty much the same as the first one, developing the mystery. I think that the two different Black Orchids are an interesting idea, but that's all I can really say about it. But it's mostly the art that gets me. But Nice Man, what do you think?
At least she has a hall pass from Batman.
Yeah.
If she didn't have a hall pass from Batman, then no, that would be just, like you said, what the hell goes on at Arkham Asylum? Anybody can just walk in.
Right.
But it's meant to be, look, this is no ordinary hall pass. This is a Batman pass.
Right.
So, therefore she can do what she did. I quite liked it. It was good to see the various characters, good to see her interaction with those characters. And I felt like I learned some more about Poison Ivy, and the Mad Hatter, a good variety of characters. Mm. So good for some variety in the story, and also good for some visual variety as well. So in this case, I will say I'm fine with the Bat Pass.
Okay.
That's all right. Yeah.
The Bat Pass. Okay.
I want to follow up on that.
Okay.
I've seen Batman integrated into stories where I disagreed with his integration. Mike, I talk almost religiously about the run that Moore did on Swamp Thing. One of my few caveats is when he is introduced to Arkham City and has a confrontation with Batman. It then becomes a superhero comic, which is what I don't want from that.
Right.
This doesn't become a superhero comic. Batman is in the shadows. You never see a full profile of him, which I think is interesting. He's just a presence. He doesn't overstay his welcome. And I think he has a very logical interaction with Black Orchid. At first, he just kind of comes by because he notices, oh, here's this new metahuman. I'm going to intervene, give her a warning. And when he sees that she's harmless, that she's just looking for answers, then he just provides some reassurance, some answering. In fact, he gives her some hope by providing her not only the information about Swamp Thing, but also about how to access Arkham Asylum using his pass. To me, that's the element of Batman I miss, where he becomes a character that represents hope. Because everyone loves making Batman this brooding, dark figure so much, I just miss him instilling hope in people as well. And as dark visually and in terms of the tone of the story can be, it was refreshing to see Batman depicted that way. And I didn't feel like it was incongruous. It felt like it was very naturally and tonally consistent with what was happening so far. I would actually argue Batman's placement was a lot less jarring than Lex Luthor's in the story.
Yes.
Now, that being said, there's one little exchange I have to point out. So Batman is talking to Black Orchid, and he says, "Woodrow has long gone, but Miss Isley is down there, and perhaps she might help you. I wish you luck. Talk to Isley, but watch her. She's poison." Okay.
I felt like I was there.
That's worthy of like CW, you know, like, or Zack Snyder, like trying to be clever. Like, did you get what I meant? You see what I did there? That's what it felt like to me.
Yes, exactly. Sorry, I got to jump in. That's another Gaiman thing. It's like, well, Neil, you really think you're clever, but it's just kind of like shoehorned and forced in, you know.
I will concede to that. I think another weakness of this whole series is that I don't want to say it's consistent, because I did enjoy this overall, but there are moments where a line like that escapes and it's just unnecessary, and it's like a very bad pun or dad joke, and it's, why did you put that in there?
Right.
Yeah. That didn't kill the mystique or aura of Batman in this inclusion for me, but oh god. I mean, it kind of took me back to the 66 serial, honestly.
Right.
Is it possible somebody said, just you need to make some form of direct reference so everybody knows this character is Poison Ivy? Because if you don't put this, maybe people won't know.
No, because I think they draw her as Ivy, so it's clear it's her.
They do.
Yeah.
And someone actually mentions she's called Poison Ivy in another interaction, so it does become redundant, superfluous. Yeah.
All right then. Yeah, dad joke.
Okay,
I'm a fan of dad jokes, so wow.
So here we are. Now we're on to the third issue of Black Orchid. And Adam, since you're so good at summarizing, do you mind quickly telling everyone in 30 seconds what happens in this issue?
Oh, the pressure's on. Anyway, in the bayou, Black Orchid then comes across Swamp Thing. And Swamp Thing, using his basically godlike abilities as this earth vegetable elemental, just conveys all this information to her, this understanding of who she is, what sort of entity she is. And he provides her with these seeds that could provide her new siblings, daughters, whatever you want to call them, so she won't feel so alone. And gratefully, she takes them and flies away, and she catches up with her younger version of herself, who was at some point kidnapped. I gloss that over. It's really a non-factor, because she was kidnapped and then she was taken back later on by Black Orchid, the younger version of Black Orchid, I should say, because there's two clones. Just to make it clear, the younger one is named Susie.
When you say sorry, back up. Sorry, because you confused me there for a second. When you say there's two clones, like there's the Black Orchid we're following, and then there's the younger one, but there's only two total, right?
Yeah, so there's just, when I say clones, like two of the existing plant-human hybrids at this point.
Right, and then the original is technically dead.
Yes.
Okay.
So anyway, they end up trying to find a place where they can exist, because they do feel displaced. They are entities unlike anything else in this world, with maybe the exception of Swamp Thing. And so they find a place in the Amazon. However, their peace is very short-lived. Even though they're accepted by the indigenous peoples there and they find a place to inhabit, Lex Luthor's men are still chasing them down, trying to gather them for scientific research. And this ex-husband of the original Black Orchid, after seeing what happened in this house where all these plant-human hybrids, these clones of his wife, were existing, he's gone mad, and he wants to continue his pursuit of them. Although things have shifted. It's gone from him wanting to murder these clones to now almost having this protective role. He's spying on Lex Luthor's men. He's spying on this cartel of people who are going to hunt them, and follows them into the Amazon. Then we have basically it's like I don't know, a condensed version of Predator, where basically the ex-husband is using tactical skills to slowly winnow away these men who were assigned the job of hunting down Black Orchid. And he takes them down one by one until there's only a handful of these goons left. Now, eventually, these hired thugs do eventually track down the two Black Orchids, the adult and then the younger one. However, they are also met up with the ex-husband, who then proceeds to, intervene, but he dies through gunfire. There's a big conflict between the pair of Lex Luthor's men. He's shot, and he dies. And at this point, Black Orchid tells these men to leave. She's not going to have any more violence here. This is supposed to be a safe place. These people are just going to create havoc. She needs them to leave. And in a surprising ending, you would think there's going to be some conflict, but kind of the leader of these men, he goes, okay, guys, you have this pesticide, you have this blowtorch, I want you to torch everything in this region of the Amazon. We're going to show them that we mean business. And they tell him, no, we're not going to do this. Look at these things. They're beautiful. They're the only things like this in this world. We're not going to fucking do this. Pardon my French. And they just then walk away, basically leaving this guy by himself in the middle of the Amazon. Now, eventually, what does transpire is that the body of the ex-husband is buried. There's a type of, I guess you can say, conciliation that happens between the adult Black Orchid clone and the memory of what happened, where the original woman that the source material of the DNA for Black Orchid was taken from was murdered by this man, and which is why he's had this fervent, almost pathological pursuit of her throughout the entire series. But in the end, what happens is his body is buried in the Amazon. The Black Orchids, they leave these seeds that were given to them by Swamp Thing, which are starting to grow. So there's going to be a new population of them. So they're going to be a new type of species, essentially. And because they've grown complacent with what's been happening in this Amazon setting, they decide, let's leave. Let's see what else the world has to offer. And our sisters, these seeds, they'll grow on their own, and they'll face the world, and they'll do just fine. And that's how the story ends, not with a big punch-up or blowout, but with this almost pacifist mentality or philosophy, and this idea of exploring new things and growing. It's a lot different than how I thought it was going to end, and a lot different than how I remembered it ending from when I read it years ago. And that's the entirety of it. That's how the story ends.
So, okay, so the person who did the foreword or the afterword or whatever in this book made a comment about that ending and said how, he actually says Black Orchid attempts to go even further than these other breakthrough works by making it plain that no matter how bold or smart or hip the new comics may be, most of them still up resorting to hackneyed moral and narrative customs. And then he says, I wish I could, of course I can't find it, but he does reference the ending. And I can appreciate what Neil Gaiman was trying to do. However, it does come off as anticlimactic to me. The idea of a pacifist, of these characters just kind of going, no, you know what? We're not going to kill her. We're not going to do anything. We're not going to listen to you. It's a great idea, but it doesn't come at the end of anything suspenseful, and I don't think it's justified by it. They don't explain how they got to that point, I don't think. And the example I'll give is, say, Pulp Fiction. We have violence all throughout Pulp Fiction. Then the climax of the movie, we have three people pointing their guns at each other, which keeps you on the edge of your seat for 10 or 15 minutes. The movie ends because Samuel Jackson's character has decided he's not going to be a gangster anymore. And so he comes up with a new solution out of the problem, which I won't spoil in case you haven't seen it. But in this scene, it's not like you have the feeling that everyone's about to die and then one character kind of solves the problem by doing something. It's more just like they decide not to act, which is the ending, but it feels anticlimactic. and there's almost like nothing at stake. Like the guy orders them to kill her, and then they just don't do it, but then nothing comes out of that. Like, do you agree or do you disagree, Adam? What do you think?
I think this is very polarizing for people, because as I've read reviews and reactions to the story after reading it for this episode, I think the reaction falls in two camps. What you've said, and I think others who appreciate that ambiguity. I shouldn't even say ambiguity. It's very clear what's happening, but that anticlimax and intentional. And I think I appreciate it. And this is a strength that I've seen Neil Gaiman perform in this story that I haven't seen him perform in other ones. The story starts with a climax. The superhero is caught and dies. The most violent, heinous act happens at the beginning, and the entire scene is just set behind this blazing bright light of this fire as her body is immolated. And the ending sequence, the character has not punched anyone, has not done anything that could be seen as traditional superheroing. She's just trying to find out who she is. And by abating violence and by not wanting, or really just saying, I'm not going to participate in it, I think the anticlimax is a point in and of itself. And the fact that the final shot is of Black Orchid kind of being subsumed by the sun as she flies off into the distance, I think makes that connection. I think it can feel like an anticlimax because most stories will not end that way. As you said, it feels like there's not stakes, but I think the main stake is, will a cycle of violence continue? And this character is the only superhero character who broke that cycle of violence, from what I could see. I think it's very bold. And I think if we compare it to standards of what a superhero narrative ought to be, it can seem unsatisfying. I think I've sat with it so much, I just realized it's not about me being satisfied because the bad guys got their comeuppance. A character discovered who they are, and they didn't have to enter into this cycle of violence. And to me, I think that's where I felt satisfied with it. That a character could show, I don't have to do this. Mm-hmm. Now, granted, spoilers, they would make an ongoing Black Orchid series after this in which she would fight crime and beat people up. So they would completely denude the point of this comic. But in my perspective, I was satisfied with it because of that.
Okay, nice, man. What do you think? What's your take?
Well, after I heard what you said, I thought I agree 100%. But then after I heard what Adam said, well, I kind of see that as well. So let's do the positives and the negatives. The positives is it's ambitious, right? Mm-hmm. As you said, you begin with all-out violence, you end with pacifism. So we give credit for that. However, let me think. However, there has been no groundwork laid whatsoever for this sudden no.
That's my issue, right?
Right. I mean, we have to then say to ourselves, rationalize it, say, well, they're just so overwhelmed by this Black Orchid's pacifism. They're just so overwhelmed by this wondrous place where they are, which is not that wondrous. I'm sure it's pretty mosquito-driven and uncomfortable and whatnot. So we have to rationalize this and say, because of these things, okay, the ending is right. It's a non-event. Nothing has been laid down, nothing. So this is like I hate to use the cliche, almost like a deus ex machina, right? Let me just pluck this out of thin air and ta-da! The day is saved. Immediately preceding that, we have this ludicrous character, this Frank Sinatra singing ex-husband, right? Isn't that? Because I was a little bit lost, to be honest with you. I don't even know where we are. Where is this jungle? Can you tell me?
It is in the Amazon. I know that.
So it's in the Amazon. How did the ex-husband get there and track them so diligently?
I'm going to say in a world full of aliens and gods and monsters. I don't know what public transport is like in this universe. Maybe it's really convenient. I get your point. I get your point.
So this lunatic is able to somehow track them every step of the way. deep into the Amazon, and the Amazon, of course, can be extremely uncomfortable. But anyway,
Uncomfortable. Yeah.
I give the credit for beginning the way it was begun. We're going to begin with violence. We're going to end with pacifism, and that's the main message of Black Orchid. I haven't been created to add to the violence. I'm just going to surround myself with beauty and try and spread the concept of beauty to others. But no, this is it. It's a nothing. It's just a damp squid ending, you know. But I'm Neil Gaiman, so therefore, if I do it, it must be good. No, it's shite.
So I'm going to do a little bit of an about phase because obviously I think it's clear I did like this. You know, I think I'm going to dissent from the general view that I thought this was really well done. There are still lots of points of which that I felt, as the kids say, it was cringe inducing. Like the fact that her ex-husband, I was holding off on this, but I wanted to make a point of this. His name is Thorn. And I think it's just like so on the nose. And I get it. Yeah. We're in DC Comics. Characters' names, they give out so much of the characterization already, but it's just so transparent of what sort of character he's meant to be. Mike, you brought up a really bad Batman line, but I think the worst line in this entire series happens in this issue, where after this, I felt was a somewhat touching moment between Black Orchid and Swamp Thing, where he exposes her mind to understand who she is and how she can continue propagating her kind. He gives her those seeds, she flies away, and Swamp Thing is joined by his mate.
Yes, thank you.
Who then goes, "Oh, who was that?"
Thank you.
He goes, "Oh, she was an old friend. I was giving her babies." Then she goes, "Oh, I think we need to talk about something." That's a bad joke. That is a shit joke.
Yeah, I agree.
Thank you, also, because that was something I really wanted to say earlier on and didn't. And I'm sorry to cut you off, Adam. When we're talking about like dialogue, unconvincing dialogue. Do you think Alan Moore would ever have written this shite? No, there's no way. That's completely out of character, completely forced. The dialogue is terrible. Even Swamp Thing's dialogue is not, it's not Swamp Thing. That's not, it's Abby, right? Abby Watson.
Abigail, yeah.
Right. It's not Swamp Thing. It's not Abby. No. It's not Batman with She's Poison. No, I'm sorry. This is shite writing. Thank God, and here's a cheap insert, so I apologize ahead of time. Thank goodness for Neil Gaiman's sake that Jim Shooter was not the editor of this series. It would have been revised the hell out of.
It would have been just as good as Secret Wars 2.
Yeah.
Oh, no, my favorite Secret Wars. Great.
Oh, here we go. That's another podcast. So here's the thing is, I have one final thing to say about Neil Gaiman, and this is directed at Nice Man, okay? Assuming everything you've said about Neil Gaiman is true, why did Alan Moore choose him to succeed him on Miracle Man and continue to champion him for the rest of his career?
All right, because do you follow any professional soccer? No. Adam, do you?
I don't really follow it, but I think I know where you're going with this.
You've come to the wrong place.
Well, here's a quick analogy. There was the most successful manager in soccer history, Sir Alex Ferguson, who was boss of Manchester United, and he chose his successor, who was an utter failure, David Moyes. Okay. So just because you're good, meaning like Alan Moore, doesn't know what the hell you're talking about when you choose your successor. I suffered through Neil Gaiman's Miracle Man, suffered. And each issue I prayed to God that it would somehow be better than the last, would somehow be good, instead of the crushing, pretentious, boring shite that it is. And I'd be quite happy, like sometimes you want to keep certain comics or, whatever. No, I'd be quite happy to burn them. I mean, Alan Moore's Miracle Man, endless fountain of like enlightenment, meaning, just great stuff. But Neil Gaiman, I read it and I think, what? This is so monotonous, and what the hell is this ridiculously contrived scene? You think you're so clever, but it's shite. It's not. It's shite masquerading as cleverness. So I'm glad you mentioned. I'm glad you mentioned what Abby said. Yes, the most cringe-inducing dialogue in the entire 3-issue thing. Worse than the other stuff that we've come up with. And I'm glad that you asked Mike about why did he choose him? Because Alan Moore, I don't know. Maybe he thought he was being generous, and Neil Gaiman has a following, and no.
I'll tell you,
and no.
I have a theory about why Neil Gaiman's popular, and this is my final thing. And it goes back to like my analogy about movies, is that I think sometimes indie films and certain types of films become popular because they don't follow a Hollywood formula, but they're not necessarily good. And so it's almost like they get by on the vibe and the tone. So you're watching a movie that's very meandering, that's very almost like meditation music. Like, it has the vibe, it's relaxing, and it makes you feel a certain way, but it's not a good story, or it's not a good song, or it's not a good whatever. And I think that could be and I can't answer for Adam, because Adam's a big fan, and I was a big fan. But I think that's it, is that when you're reading Neil Gaiman stories, because he's so well read, and as you said, he writes with such purple prose, it makes you feel like you're reading this literate story for adults. But at the end of the day, maybe an average issue of Fantastic Four by Steve Englehart actually has a better story, right? I think that's your point, Nice Man.
Yeah,
that's just my theory.
Steve Englehart's a much better writer than Neil Gaiman.
Well, I'm sure Steve Englehart would agree with you.
I just want to make this.
I'm sure he would.
From my perspective too. I'm not a Neil Gaiman apologist. Like, we don't need to get into the misconduct allegations or anything like that. It's obviously publicized enough. I just have not been a fan of his writing for a long time because I found redundancy in it.
Right.
And I'm going to say this to any criticism about his prose style. Taste is taste, and what some person enjoys, another person will not enjoy. I don't think what I've read in here is purpley. I think what I've read in here that I didn't like was awkward or stilted or bad attempts at humor.
Right.
The stuff, for me, the elements that were not those far, far outweighed the elements that I did not like. And I think paired with McKean's art, I came away with this very great mood piece of a story where maybe following the lines for a narrative didn't always track that well, but the overall feeling of it was something that I enjoyed quite a lot. For me, I will not say this surpasses anything McKean did in terms of Arkham Asylum or the aforementioned Sandman series for Gaiman, but as a curiosity and as, again, this kind of token of this time period where comics were trying to verge towards literary, mature subjects, quote unquote, take that for what you will. I think it's a very interesting curioso for that time. I will recommend this to people. I will recommend this softly, letting them know it's far from perfect. But I think in terms of the art, and I think in terms of the concept, and as even Nice Man said, the ambition of the story, I think there's a lot of merit here. I think, especially of everything we've read, which hasn't been a lot so far in this podcast from Neil Gaiman, this is by far the best thing that we've covered so far. Including the one I missed, Violent Cases. I think it exceeds that as well.
Okay. Well, on that note, we will probably only be reviewing one more Neil Gaiman comic, unless something changes, because,
Don't give up hope for a nice guy. Nice man.
Nice man.
Wise guy.
But before we can get to more Neil Gaiman, we got to get to more Peter Milligan. Ooh. And so on our next episode, we will be jumping directly into the DC universe and reviewing a Batman Dark Knight Dark City.
Ah, interesting.
I thought you were going to say Ecstatics.
No, not quite. Yeah, that Batman story called Ecstatics. No, that's months, years away on our podcast. But we'll get there eventually. Okay, I want to thank Nice Man for joining us. I want to thank Adamantium for joining us. And be sure to check out all of our episodes on YouTube as well as comicbooksyndicate.com. We review every single superhero comic ever written by an English, Irish, or Scottish writer. And on that note, until the next time, see you later.